everyone. I'm sitting here with my sock. I'm getting along really nicely, and I thought I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how I had to change my Jane Austen ranking of books a little bit with the recent reread of all her books that I did. And when I say all her books, I mean her 6 main novels. So I haven't included Lady Susan, any of her unfinished fiction, nor her juvenilia in it. So it's really only the 6 what I class main novels. So Persuasion, Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility, Emma, Mansfield Park, and Northanger Abbey. And I was a teenager, like most readers, most female readers probably as well. There's a phase you go through in your teenage years where you read a lot of 19th century fiction, and I was no different. And so my first encounter with Jane Austen was in German translation, and I read them all that time ago. And, and I enjoyed them, although I think a lot of it just went over my head. And then I reread some of them in my 20s, again in German translation. And then in 2005, and I know exactly why it was 2005, I had been living in the UK for 2 years. I read them for the first time in English, and I absolutely loved it. In fact, I loved it so much that when I had a nervous breakdown in the summer of 2005, I read and reread Persuasion several times. I'm not going to say how many times, but quite a few, double digits. So yeah, it healed me, and once summer turned into autumn, I felt a lot better. Sometimes books just have that kind of power over us, and reading something that really jives with us is just perfect. I do not know to this day what it was back then that Persuasion evoked in me and why it made me feel better when I was feeling so bleak, but it really did. Somehow it just did. And sometimes it's just okay to not question why something works and just accept that it has worked. And I have read Persuasion out of all the Jane Austen novels the most. I usually read it at least once a year. Sometimes I feel like maybe I'm getting a little bit over it, but then again, I might pick it up the next time and I just love it just as much. So it goes through phases. And so when rereading Austen, depending on where I am in my life and how I feel about myself and the world, it tends to change how I perceive certain aspects of the books, how certain characters annoy me or excite me, or how I find different facets or a new understanding of them. And this time was no different. So I found this rereading experience really quite interesting, especially because I was also discussing the books quite a bit with my teenager, who has read, apart from Emma, which they have to read over the summer, and Northanger Abbey, they have read all of the others. And it was really quite interesting discussing the things that I was thinking about with them as well. So yeah, obviously Jane Austen is, like kind of romantic, like her books are often seen as like romantic books, and certainly when films are made out of them, the kind of romance angle is very heavily focused. And yes, they employed a very typical, romance tropes, like you could say Pride and Prejudice, enemies to lover, or Emma is friends to lovers, or you could, attribute all these kind of things, like Persuasion, second chance romance, to it. But obviously these kind of connotations would have been utterly meaningless to Jane Austen herself. For me, what I really like is that she was such a keen observer of the people you find in every social group. The chatty ones, the passive-aggressive ones, the ones that want to better themselves at all costs, the liars, the cheaters, the ones that are, you know, keen to improve their social standing. All these kind of people you find to this day in all social groups. And it is really, you know, I find that really fascinating. And this time I've empathized a lot with the characters I haven't empathized before. And so yeah, let's go. Let's start with the book that is in the last place, because I always find that more interesting. And this time Mansfield Park really got on my nerves. And it's mainly to do with Edmund. I've never been a big fan of Edmund. Edmund being the second son of the family, being raised to become a vicar, to take over a living, his older brother being, you know, like a little bit of a disappointment, a rascal, a bit of a scoundrel, certainly a waster. And then Fanny, who is the niece who gets plucked from her family, who is, you know, having quite hard times due to the imprudent marriage of her mother, and put into this well-to-do family near Northampton, and lives with them, and is ever so grateful, taught to be ever so grateful for every little crumb that she gets. And the only friend she has is really Edmund, but Edmund is a really parsimonious prick. And I'm sorry to say it, I do not like Edmund. And I often have wished that she wouldn't end up with him, but she does. And I just hate all aspects of Edmund, where she, you know, where she writes about him, you know, like correcting her thoughts on her reading. You know, he's constantly like trying to improve her character. And clearly he does a good job, because, I mean, the only person with any sense in that entire family is Fanny. And you could say it is maybe because of the tuition from Edmund. But Edmund himself obviously has no sense whatsoever. And I'm not just saying because he falls in love initially with a woman who's absolutely not right for him. You know, you can forgive someone an infatuation with a character that, you know, they never met before. You know, like a type of person they've never met before. It is interesting, and we've all been there. You know, we find something new and exciting, and we're like absolutely besotted by the idea of it. And, you know, and that is what happens to Edmund. But it is the kind of slow realization that, you know, like he would be better off with Fanny, and how that sort of materializes. But also in the way that he, like so many vicars, to be fair, or vicars to be, is this kind of like having all these ideals and really falling short of themselves. And whilst I think failing is part of human nature, Edmund is the perfect example of like having this kind of severe moral compass is, you know, kind of making your failings even more apparent. I'm not saying don't have a moral compass at all. We need all to have a moral compass, you know, but I think his kind of rigidity in certain aspects really doesn't do him any service, and him wanting to be the good one is really tiring. But who I found myself actually having a lot of empathy for in this section was Fanny's family back in Plymouth, because just imagine, you know, like you make a marriage, you know, like Fanny's mom makes this marriage. She's really in love with this sailor, or like I think he was an officer on board of a ship, and then he is injured and he is invalided out, and then suddenly like the life circumstances are bad, and the man who you fell in love with, he's gone because of his injury, and he is, you know, like sad and depressed, and turns to drink and becomes unlike the man you fell in love with. You know, the man you fell in love with is gone. And and then you have just child after child after child. And you have to go and beg your sisters for help. That must have rankled, right? I mean, that must have just so rankled. I really felt for her. And then your daughter, your oldest daughter, you know, comes back. It must have been hard to send her away in the first place. I don't believe for one second that it was easy, because whilst you know, her mother is portrayed as loving the boys more, I also know from, you know, like my own great grandparents, you know, the girls are important because they help the mother out, because that was traditionally how it was. You know, the boys, you know, like worked outside the house and the girls helped inside the house. And especially if you have a lot of kids, you know, your older daughters become second mums. And in the beginning of the book, Fanny thinks about how she misses looking after the little babies, you know, the little ones. And, you know, so that was definitely her role. So her mother must have felt that absence keenly. But now that kid comes back and she's a grown girl, grown woman, and she is very different because she was put into different circumstances. I also always feel sorry for Fanny, because I think, you know, some of us will have experienced this kind of sensation of like you can't ever really go back. And yeah, so it is really, you know, quite poignant, you know, this kind of relationship. I felt quite sad for her mother and father to realize the eyes or the viewpoint that Fanny is looking at them with, and knowing that they fall short and are being strangers. It was really quite sad. People now would make TikToks about it. So yeah, that was my different. I never really thought much about them. I always used to experience this bit where she is in Plymouth, you know, as an injustice. But now I feel like it is a little bit of justice as well, to kind of this failed reconciliation, you could say. Yeah, it's, you know, I found it quite poignant this time. So that's book 6, you know, that's the least favorite. Sometimes I really enjoy Mansfield Park. This time I just couldn't get past it. The whole Edmund thing, he just annoyed me too much. Then number 5 is Northanger Abbey, and I don't really have as much to say about that one, because it's a funny book, you know, and it is very funny. It's basically a fangirling book, isn't it? You know, like the story, young girl reads a lot of gothic fiction, fantasizes about being a heroine in a real gothic drama, suddenly finds herself in a situation that is not dissimilar to those in some of the gothic dramas, and realizes that she doesn't like the reality of it one bit. Yeah, so I found that really quite funny. I think the characters in the book are probably the ones in Jane Austen novels that leave me the most cold. And you will wonder why it is then rank 5. And that is purely because I find the book very, very funny and very humorous and very well observed. This kind of, you know, now it would be, you know, like maybe someone fangirling over BTS or something like that and going to Korea. You can just see, you know, like it's so timeless, this kind of teenage infatuation with a concept of something, or a young woman's infatuation, because I don't think it's restricted to just teenagers. And it's also not just restricted to young people. You know, I think, you know, we all can fall prey to an infatuation with something like that. So yeah, and that's why it's higher. You know, I think it's probably, for me, the least well-drawn characters, because she really focuses a lot on the plot of this kind of fangirl moment. So yeah, it's number 5. Number 4 is Emma. And I was debating a lot, you know, where to place Emma, because I really do love Emma. And but I always have a little bit of secondhand embarrassment reading it. And I don't ever really know why that is, yeah? Because I'm not like Emma in the slightest, you know, like I don't want to bring people together. I don't want to set people up. But at the same time, I'm probably a lot like Emma, because Emma really doesn't like change. Yeah. Emma really wants to be in control of how things go. That's also guilty as charged. So that's probably why I suffer a little bit with secondhand embarrassment, because whilst I'm not in the actuality of what she does like her, in the bigger picture of it, I'm probably a lot like Emma in many ways. But my favorite, like plot is this time, just like, the fate of the elderly lady in the book, and like the kind of horrible situation that where Emma insults her and then has to, and everyone is shocked by how she insults the lady. And I've been thinking about this old lady a lot now. Because imagine, like, you're genteel but not rich. You're, reduced circumstances. You're a spinster, and you really depend a lot on the society of those that are your betters in order to have society at all, because you can't really do society with those below you. It must have been so constrictive and so awful to live that way. And you can't keep pace with, like a family like Emma's, but like her giving her company is probably the only company, like that kind of company she could have. And it is just so sad the way she must have humbled herself all the time to be considered to be kind of essentially a little bit patronizingly looked after, and then to be insulted in that way, in this very thoughtless way and very wrong way as well. It just made me feel so sad. And I can't stop thinking about her, what kind of life that must have been, because these women obviously existed. Probably not by the drove, but a plenty, like later on, we will find them in fiction where, they end up being governesses, like in Jane Eyre, and, genteel but not rich. It must have been such a terrible situation to find yourself in. Because if you were to, no one would hire a genteel woman, let's say, as a maid, so it was either a governess, that was like the lowest you could work on, or a companion, and that was really all you could do, or hope that someone will marry you. But obviously once your first, bloom was over, that would become increasingly unlikely. And as Jane Austen says, men tend to seek women with fortune. So yeah, it is, quite interesting. I was struck once again as well by just how funny the book is in places, and how she makes fun of Emma the entire time. Probably also that's why I find it embarrassing. But yeah, anyway, so number 3 is Sense and Sensibility. It's been actually quite a few years since I read that one. I haven't read Sense and Sensibility for quite a few years. We've recently watched the movie with Hugh Grant in it, and what's her name? Kate Winslet and Emma Thompson. And I just had a total senior moment there. And I really liked it. And reading the book, I was both impressed by how close they were, but also how different it was. My favorite, again, and I think there's just a theme of age creeping in, were like the two mother figures, or the three mother figures, although we never really meet the third mother figure in person. You know, like the mother of Kate Winslet and Emma Thompson. Now I forgot the characters' names. Can't believe it. Yeah, I can't. Total mind blank. So, you know, like having been married, having been the mistress of a big house, and then losing it all because of because of the son inheriting it, having to move out, being met with so little compassion by your stepson's wife. Again, that would be TikToks now. You know, it was like, it would be an am I the asshole kind of situation. And then having to bear up, yeah, and she does it, I think, fairly well. I think the film does her a little bit injustice. I think on the whole, she lost her husband, she lost her home, she has to make do with an income. Again, you know, like, you're genteel, so you can't just hire some rooms about over a shop, and, you know, because in a way you think, why doesn't she do that? But she can't, you know, because she has to think of her daughters. You know, who would they marry? You know, they're like way too educated or, you know, bred out to marry the local butcher, you know, even though it probably would be a sensible thing to do. And so, yeah, it was just like, you know, the kind of sadness of that. But then also the other mother of the, you know, like the mother-in-law of the patron who gives them the cottage. She's succeeded in motherhood, really. You know, she's married her two daughters off, which our other mother, you know, like she hasn't, you know, Mrs. Dashwood, the mother, Mrs. Dashwood hasn't married her daughters off yet. And that must have been weighing on her mind, that, you know, like her hopes of them marry, like the older are marrying and then the younger marrying Willoughby, you know, and then that doesn't materialize. It must have been an anxiety, because you don't want that fate for your daughters to be spinsters, right? Especially if there's no real income. But Mrs. Jennings has achieved it all, you know, like she has two daughters, she's married them off well, they are well settled, they have good husbands, you know, so I would say they have good husbands, certainly a good situation, good standing in life. She can be cheerful and relaxed and enjoy her life now, because that's, you know, she's done it, you know, she's completed her life's mission. And then obviously the mother of Hugh Grant, can't think of the character's name, that's embarrassing. She has, you know, two sons and a daughter. The daughter is well married now, well established, but she places all her hope, you know, into the sons, and especially the older. He has to make something of himself. And she is also in like a unusual situation, that she actually holds the purse strings. That wasn't very common. That was, you know, like quite a lucky position to find yourself in, the husband's dead, and you as the woman hold the purse strings. It hasn't gone straight to the eldest son. That was really quite unusual. And you know, and so she's trying to make something of a son who really doesn't want to be made of anything. He just wants to become a vicar. And quite interesting as well how low really that profession was looked down upon, you know, genteel, but you wouldn't want it really for your firstborn. You would want something more illustrious, like a career in politics. So yeah, I really resonated a lot with those mothers, you know, for obvious reasons. Pride and Prejudice, don't really have much to say. That's book 2 for me. I enjoyed it a lot, and I really this time sort of appreciated a lot more the class conflict, because Elizabeth's uncle in London is very well to do, but he lives near his warehouses in Cheapside, and so he is not on the same level as Mr. Darcy, who is what is called landed gentry. And you know, and even though like probably in money, her uncle in London is probably quite rich, but he doesn't have like that kind of income. And I think that is the separator, you know, like, because Darcy's income is almost like an annuity, you know, it comes, he can just be at leisure. And whilst he has estates to look after, he doesn't have to look after a business. Whereas her uncle has to run a business. And so it is a completely different class of people. And whilst financially, I don't think in terms of how much they can afford will be that much different. You know, her uncle is not in a position to become landed gentry. You know, whilst his income might even be close, I don't think he, you know, the standing isn't there yet, you know. So that's a really interesting thing. It's such a British ingrained thing. So yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that. And then Persuasion will always remain my favorite. And I felt a bit sorry for Elizabeth this time, because with her cousin, you know, turning out to be just as bad as a person as we had suspected, and being more interested in her sister anyway. She really now has no marriage prospects, and she will end up a spinster, and she will end up a spinster not unlike, you know, some of the other spinsters in the books, where, because she won't be rich, she will certainly not be able to afford a house in Bath once her father dies. She will most likely have to, you know, like rely on the kindness of her sisters, one of them who will, you know, one's inherit the other estate and the other one who's married rich to Captain Wentworth. And she will not be able to deal with it well, because she was the first, the most popular, the most beautiful, the most favored, and she will most likely end up like a spinster. So yeah, been thinking a lot about that. So yeah, these are my rankings of the Jane Austen novels. I hope you enjoyed this, and I shall now make myself some coffee, have some lunch, and upload this video for you all. So have a lovely weekend. I hope the weather is fine where you are, but not too fine. I hope you're not sweating buckets, and I shall speak to you all very, very soon. Bye-bye.